or late good morning to everyone. Hasn't this been a fabulous conference thus far? Kudos to Dr. Jellison for getting this together. And I'm glad that Dr. Cox is still with us. Dr. Cox, that Ghost Mansions thing is a winner. It will be irresistible clickbait, although you will probably annoy a lot of cable TV supernatural enthusiasts. All right. Well, my name is Jack Marchbanks, and I am a proud alum of Ohio University. And I'm excited to be here. And it is my honor and privilege to bring to the lectern this morning Professor Ric Sheffield, who will be delivering his address on diversity in the Heartland, exploring the growth and impact of rural diversity upon Ohio's small town cultures and characters. And Professor Sheffield and I have become fast friends this weekend. We have common stomping grounds in Greater Columbus, and he was exiting his role as an assistant attorney general in the Ohio Attorney General's office with former Attorney General Bill Brown, right at the time I was beginning my career as an administrator for the Ohio Department of Transportation. He is a personal inspiration to me because he is living proof that one can preserve enough neurons after state government to enjoy a rich intellectual life. So, you're my hero, Rick. But in all seriousness, before coming to Kenyon, Professor Sheffield served for 10 years as Assistant Attorney General for the state of Ohio. He began his legal career as a civil rights lawyer, handling primarily sex and race discrimination cases. He subsequently held the position of chief attorney as head of the state's Consumer Protection Division. In addition to research that has focused upon the relationship between law and issues of gender and race and ethnicity, he has spent several years examining issues involving the African American experience in rural Ohio. He's among a select group of scholars chosen to participate in the Ohio Humanity Council's Speakers Bureau, lecturing widely on issues of race and law as well as rural diversity. He has published articles, reviews, and book chapters on topics including legal history, the legal profession, and African American social and legal history. He is the author of the book, and I'm going to get a copy as soon as I leave here, We Got By, A Black Family's Journey in the Heartland. His current project includes completion of a manuscript on voting rights cases from Ohio in the late 1860s and early 1870s. A graduate of Case Western Reserve University, where he attended college, graduate school, in sociology and law school, he has served upon various statewide policymaking and regulatory boards. During his career at Kenyon, he spent several years on the college's senior staff as associate provost before his return full-time to the faculty, and he's now a member emeritus. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ric Sheffield.
I think that had some way of saying I'm older than he is, and I, it made me just a little nervous, just a little bit. First of all, thank you very much to Dr. Jellison, Dr. Marchbanks, and all of the participants in putting together this wonderful conference. It's a delight to have been invited to be here, and I've been asked to sort of stand at the podium. I'm one of those professors who likes to walk around. Sometimes it's like one of those daytime talk shows where you're going up and down the aisles. So I'm going to be careful not to do that because they said, please, don't go too far away from. I'm going to go fast. I need to go fast because I have so much I want to talk to you about. So just please forgive me. At times you can sort of say, can you slow down? And I'm going to say no, because I'm really into this. This is also really exciting for me because this may be the first time in decades that I'm talking about rural diversity with an audience that's made up of folks who, many of whom are experts, many of whom have thought about or engaged this topic before. I got to tell you, just 2 weeks ago, I was the keynote speaker for the American Farm Bureau Federation's National Conference. One, I was shocked they invited me to come and do it, but there were folks there from 32 states, 500 Farm Bureau staff members, and the whole sort of deal. And I knew going in, if I was going to talk about rural diversity, everyone's going to say, oxymoron. Doesn't work like that. Well, we're going to see, aren't we? I taught a course for a few years called Diversity in the Heartland. And I always give my students a writing assignment. I taught at Kenyon College, so, everything's all about writing. And I gave them a writing assignment. In 6 words, talk about rural. In 6 words, talk about diversity. That's how we began the class. And of course, they were upset because they wanted to write 6 pages, 6 chapters. Don't talk about 6 words sort of stuff, okay? So that's where it begins. We're going to talk about the essence. And again, I like this because maybe you're a homebody. How many of you, by the way, born and raised in a rural community? Oh, I got family here. I like it. This is good. The rest of y'all, I'll talk to you too, but essence of rural community. It looks kind of like around here, maybe. And I asked my students who come to Kenyon College from all over the country, all over the world, in fact, talk to me about rural. What is rural? If we're going to talk about rural diversity, we start there. So we're going to deal with the concept of ruralness, what sometimes we also call rurality. And here's what they gave me. These are the types of words that they associated with rural. And of course, doing the analysis, we decided that we could fairly easily say these words are largely about geography, and they're largely about architecture, and they first architecture, they looked at me funny. I said, silos and barns, and okay, gotcha, architecture, and inhabitants. So that's where we begin when we talk about ruralness, because I can't talk to you about rural diversity until you have that first part, but now that I know so many of y'all are country folk, all right, we can do that. Now, unfortunately, those big city folks who come to college in small town rural America, they subscribe to some interesting stereotypes about small town country folks. And I realize you young folks, handful of you in here, have no idea what this is. So please turn to the people beside you without feeling conspicuous to say, do you know what this is? Y'all know these folks. This is, and I was born and raised in Mount Vernon, Ohio, Knox County, Ohio, okay? I know what small town is. I know what country is. My family were farmers. So I know the deal. I didn't know any of this stuff until it became a hugely popular pop culture. Just so you get a sense for you youngins out there who don't quite know what those were, these are pop culture representations of ruralness. These were really popular. They were hugely popular. These spoke to folks, especially big city folks, who had never set foot on any sort of rural space. But I was really interested in these towns in American society that were so well represented that somehow didn't seem to have anybody who looked like me. And I watched those shows too, and I was, probably taking in, sheriff and all those, where were my people? Mayberry. Mayberry, yes. I've been there a few times. Mayberry, yeah. Hooterville. How many of y'all been to Hooterville? No, it's fictional. Don't, At Bug Tussle, Tennessee? Okay. Oops, I would be remiss not to let you know. There were 2 characters who appeared on these programs. Look at that, Rockne Tarkington, Andy Griffin Show in 1967, showed up there, yeah. And Gene Bell, Mr. Drysdale's secretary, Beverly Hillbilly. I want to make you feel better about having watched those shows as I did. But you know, there's something else about the representation of rural life that isn't just this quaint, romanticized notion of these shucks, golly, gee whiz people. There was another part about rural life to which we were exposed that sort of began to talk to us. And some of it, again, younger folks are like, I have no idea what that is. And some of the older folks are like shaking already because this was one of the most frightening shows, right? Movies. But I was really interested in how it is that we constructed rurality and the extent beyond the sort of shucks, gee whiz, cute. Rural is danger for some people. And I know this for a fact because, as I said, my students come mostly from metropolitan areas. I always tease them about living in a high-rise in New York City and they don't know the person who lives next door to them. They could be on the elevator riding with the person who lives right next door. But rural, what they do say to me is, I'm kind of worried about going out in Mount Vernon. And I'm thinking, have you looked at the crime rates? I know you're from New York City, I know you're from Chicago, I know you're from Baltimore, but have you looked at the crime rates? Deliverance was the movie that affected even the younger generation. Their parents say, have you seen Deliverance? You got to watch Deliverance. Because they subscribe to the notion of that rural dangerousness. But you know what, folks? All right, now here's the other assignment I give my students. Take this image, this is my artifact. I was chair of American Study. This is the artifact. All right, write a paragraph for me. And they look, and they think, I think that's a black guy. And I think the black guy's in a canoe. Oh my God. You know something bad's gonna happen to him, right? Right? Yeah. Oh, come on, look at y'all. You were thinking that. No, not really. Because if you know Baratunde, he has a regular show on PBS, outdoor show. And some of you might even know about Outdoor Afro. Anybody familiar with Outdoor Afro? That, again, dispelling the notion that black folks should not go out into the country because it's really especially dangerous for us. In fact, in some ways, we've constructed an American society that rural life and rural people are all about preying upon black people. Don't go out into the country. And I got to tell you, my big city friends who used to come out to Mount Vernon, they would look around and say, it's really dark out here. I'm thinking, well, think about light pollution where you come from that you don't get to see. What are those things up there? Those lights that are kind of twinkling and, yeah, those are called stars. I know it's tough, but despite all of that, there's still a notion that, black people should be really careful when they go out into the country. You know that, right? And again, for you folks that, are not really into pop culture, in American Studies we use a lot of pop culture because you all consume a lot of pop culture. And so we take that and we utilize it. Well, just so I want you to have the titles. So this construction that there's a dangerousness for black people in particular, we have to sort of deal with. Oh, there's something else about small town living, country living, right? I mean, literally country living. Look at the flags here. We have constructed it in another way. And again, I ask you, who are those people? And why don't you see me there? And who is conspicuously absent from this new chic sort of notion of rural life that is now constructed and monetized in a way that you can buy your way into rural America if you buy the right sort of items. Get yourself some nice boots and a hat, maybe some bib overhauls, and you might look as country as you want to be. But we're going to talk about diversity in rural America. You already know about the rural stuff. But you might not know as much about rural diversity as perhaps we will. And I want to talk about the representations of those folks like me, people of color, born and raised in small town America. And again, we've been here from the very beginning. This is not something new. Who are these inhabitants? What do they look like? What are they all about? How are they represented to all of us? And so I say, generations and generations. This is Mr. Payne. This is one of my neighbors. He was one of my neighbors. Mr. Payne's not around anymore. But I need to start with a human being, a real face. Concepts are cool, but if you cannot relate it to individuals, human beings, they're not terribly helpful, except for, academics. You folks are really into these, but I talk to real people all the time. Do you want to know something about small town? And again, I was fascinated by the discussion about language. You want to know something about small town colored folks? And you have to understand why I use that, and we will go back to that. But when I was growing up, we were colored. Sorry. And if you said anything else to my grandmother, she'd smack you silly. But we'll talk about that in a second. You want to know something about small town black folks in American society, Ohio in particular? You have to know something about families. Because it starts with family. It really starts with family. Family names. You go to any small town around, and if you say, are you a Turner? Or do you know the Bookers? Do you know the Mayos? Do you know the... That's when you start to connect. People are going to say, oh, okay, Goins. I could have like 50 names up here. But the other thing about these names is they connect small town black folks to other small towns. You know that migration brings us to, and my family is connected not just to Knox County, but it's connected to Muskingum County, to Belmont County, so this is the Booker family. Actually, Mr. Booker, Joseph Booker on the right there, was an enslaved person. Migrated eventually to Knox County, Ohio. In some ways, his wife, Viola Booker, was a Simmons. I give you that connection because this is the Simmons family, and that's Viola in the top left side. And I say this to you because when we talk about talented tenths and we talk about aristocracy and if there are elite black families and yada, this was the family in my little town that we all said, wow, if we could be like the Simmonses. Because Samuel Simmons, the patriarch, was the first black graduate of Mount Vernon High School in the 1880s. And his children all went on to college, and his son graduated from Oberlin College. And his son also went on to medical school. This is from a little tiny town in Knox County, Ohio. Oops, wrong slide? No, y'all heard it. You get people of color in rural America, mixed race. They could be triracial, but they might be more than just triracial. But clearly, this is the Bird family. And the Bird family, as most of you who work with census records realize how oftentimes your racial affiliation and classification changes from time to time. And some of it has to do with whether or not Mr. Plecker has decided to move you off the rolls. And in any event, this is the Bird family in Knox County, Ohio. You want to know something about small town black folks? You have to understand something about work. We're all not just sitting around there trying to figure out what to do with ourselves. We've got a lot of work to do. And in my community, it often had to do with farms because Knox County is a rural county, and most of us who settled there originally were farmers. And in fact, this is another Mr. Simmons, not the same Simmons family, although his son said to me, I think we are kind of related someplace, but my mother used to tell me about riding in this wagon with hay bales, and they would have those hay rides in this particular wagon. And what else did we do? What kind of work? Well, we farmed the land. Of course we farmed the land, but you know what else? We migrated into that community because there were factory jobs. Usually factory jobs were the sort of back-breaking, terribly dangerous jobs that a lot of the white workers did not want to take. But at least you could earn wages when you migrated up from the South. That was important. Many of us came in the company of white people as servants, as domestics, my family in particular. come from a long line of maids. It's an interesting experience, by the way, when you're looking at census records and you look at your grandmother and it says maid, and you look at your father. My father was listed shoe shine boy. And you look at that and you realize, wow, this was reality for my family. You want to know something about small town black folks? You got to understand something about the church. I'm sorry. If you're not willing to think about the role that the church has played in black life, you might as well give it up, because it's not going to work for you, I assure you. This is the choir in the Mount Calvary Baptist Church. This is the church I was raised in. In fact, my mother's up there, the fifth one from the right, and my grandmother's up there, and my aunt's up there. And this is small town America, folks. You want to understand about rural life, you have to understand something about the role of the black church. And even strange things like a Negro pastor for a white congregation. Anybody know where Tiverton is? Okay, y'all not really rural, are you? Coshocton County. The Reverend Samuel Sheffield, my grandfather, became the pastor of a white church in Coshocton County. And it's interesting because you all know the saying, right? The most segregated in the, there you go. Yeah, it's Sundays, right? Because black and white people, despite whatever that religious profession might be, we'd never really come together. And here's my grandfather who was invited to be the pastor of a white church in Coshocton County, Ohio. You want to know something about black folks? Yeah, you have to understand something about the work and, yes, something about the church, but you also have to understand we had social lives as well, just like the bare knuckles boxer Kid Jackson in Mount Vernon. And understand that music was a very important part of our lives, Dr. Marchbanks. Very important part of our lives. And in every little community, you had these little combos, these little bands. And even though, as was the case in Knox County, Ohio, these bands would go out and play at Kenyon College for the dance. Kenyon, by the way, was an all-male school, so they would import the women for their major dances. And then they'd hire this colored band to come out and play, because they played good music. And we also had theatrical productions. Like in 1921, you could go see an operetta for 35 cents. What can you get for 35 cents today? I said, young kids are like, 35 cents? What is it? But yeah, you could go see an operetta for 30, given by the Colored Women's Glee Club. Now keep that in mind, because that becomes really important when you talk about what's happening in small town America. Some of you might be old enough to understand what these guys got to think, oh, they're all butlers. They're all, no, Masons. This was the Colored Masonic Order in Knox County, Ohio. In fact, we had Colored Elks, and we had Oddfellows and Knights of Pythias, and we had all of those traditional fraternal organizations were operating in my little town. Why? Because they couldn't join the white organizations. You all know that. So understand what's coming up in these small little towns. And the membership may only be 12. It might be 13, 14, but they were there. Oh, and we were talking about music and your project, and oh my goodness gracious, Marian Anderson came and performed in my little town in 1930. And when she came, it's interesting, I interviewed Mr. Booker. Mr. Booker was at the time, I think he was 91 years old. And he was telling me the story about her coming to perform in Mount Vernon in 1930. And he says, son, don't you know this story? I said, I'm sorry, sir, I don't know this story. He said, well, she stayed with your grandfather. And now I had this point of pride. It's like, all right, Marian Anderson stayed with my family. Why'd she stay with my family? Yeah, because she couldn't stay at the local hotel. Put on by the Booker T. Washington Club in Mount Vernon, Ohio. And Mount Vernon had a Booker T. Washington. Well, not only that, but it also had 20th Century Club, Phyllis Wheatley Club, House of Ruth, Quarter Clan. all a part of that Colored Women's Club network. Some state affiliated, some nationally affiliated. Remember, this is a small town in Ohio that was represented in these sorts of social organizations. And we also like to play sports, just in case you were wondering. And in Mount Vernon, Ohio, again, Mr. Booker, in my interview with him, he said, son, you ever hear about, that Satchel Paige? I said, yes, sir, I do know that name. He said, well, he pitched here against the Mount Vernon Giants. My brother was on the team. A little piece of history I had no idea about growing up in that particular community, but it was really clear to me. Whether you're talking about erasure or something else. And I'm sorry, y'all are saying, would he just stop this mess because he's trying to make a point? Yeah, I'm trying to make a point. This is the Miss Bronze Ohio pageant, folks. The Miss Bronze Ohio pageant. Why? Because black women could not participate in the other pageants. Interestingly enough, those 5 women at the top, they were, as referred to in my town, the sharp girls. They didn't mean what they looked like, although they were, but they were the sharp girls, sisters from Mount Vernon, Ohio, in a statewide pageant. And as I did research about this particular pageant, because, well, my mother was in it. I know, but out of respect, I'm not going to put her bathing suit picture up there. But in any event, as I researched it, I found out there were 11 young women from Mount Vernon, Ohio, in a statewide. Think about this, folks. Participation by women from rural communities in a statewide pageant. And then think about what that says, what that means. You want to know something about black folks in small town America? Yeah, church is important. Yeah, work is important. Social life is important. But you have to understand something about migration. Why did they come here? What propelled them to do that? And obviously, home ownership was an important part of that. And you big city folks don't quite get it, but the proportion of folks in rural America who own or are trying to own their own homes is really high. If you really want to have an opportunity to fend for yourself, having some land to farm is really important. How do I know that? Because my grandmother used to talk about, something happened in 1929. I can't quite remember what that was, but something really problematic happened in 1929. And people used to show up at our farm at the back door, sometimes hat in hand, saying, I will work for a piece of bread. I didn't say a loaf of bread. I said a piece of bread. And my grandmother said, and we never turned them away. Not because we were wealthy, believe me, we were not wealthy. Not because we had a garden that we called it putting up. We're going to put up some green beans. We're going to put up some, and you know what? Every time a man showed up at that back door, she would send one of us to the pantry or to the cellar. Come up, those mason jars. I'm talking to big city folk. Y'all are looking at me like, you have to understand. Mason jar, go get some peaches. Go get some tomatoes. And my grandmother would always say, and a guy would look at her, I get all of that? Well, yeah. But you better bring the jar back. Come on. And they never failed to bring the jar back. They cleaned it, whole deal, brought it back. Work for wages, as I said, unfortunately, this gentleman died falling into one of the ovens there in Mount Vernon. Black men felt compelled to prove their patriotism. Not just you big city folks, but those of us in rural America, we enlisted, probably 100% unless they were incapable of doing so. And some of us were turned away and we lied and came in anyway. But we came back to, I'm going to say something here. Some of you know this story already. You can see in the front row, these are what? These are the officers. They're all white. And all the enlisted men behind them are all black. And when I interviewed some of the black men from my community who served in World War I, even those who served in World War II, and they talked about this phenomenon, and they would talk about, again, in a town like mine, I never had another student of color in a classroom all the way through 12th grade in my community, not one. So when black men in my community oftentimes enlisted, they would go to the induction center, and the person there would say, okay, you, to the white, you go that way, and to the black guys, you go that way. Well, no, we're joining up together. I don't care. You go that way, you go that way. That was oftentimes what they said was the first experience they had had with that in their lives. So what distinguishes black folks? And many of my white neighbors, my classmates, my teammates, would oftentimes say, you grew up just like I did. I mean, we went to school together. We did the same. We played on the same play. We did everything together. But you know what? Our experiences were not the same. Because you went to school, you did all those things surrounded by people who look like you. Always. And I rarely had anyone who looked like me. Now, I have to correct. I said to you I went to school, elementary school. I wasn't the only one in my elementary school. There were 5 of us in my elementary school. My brother, my sister, my cousin. You get the point. And they sure as hell were not going to build a school just for us. This is the Vernon Theater on the public square in Mount Vernon. Typical sort of site maybe in the early 1950s. Folks going to the movie. I throw this in because this is my sister in the front. And in some ways, it suggests to you what's happening here. She's the only person who looks like her going to the movie that day. I call it invisible. And it's interesting, it's a fascinating concept and phenomenon that some of us can be at one and the same time invisible and hypervisible. That I have had people say to me, and when I give these talks, small town America, all over the place, people say, I'm not really sure, Professor, if we have any black people who live in our community. And I'm stunned by that because black people have lived in your community from the very beginning, and yet you don't see them. Why don't you see them? How can they be so invisible to you at the same time if they walk into your grocery store? Oh, you notice. It's as if you were on a stage. And I remember pardon me if I have to sort of tell a story here, but I have to tell you a story. I'm one of those people, I like to go to the grocery store. My wife loves that I like to go to the grocery store. I like to go to the grocery store. And I remember one day I was standing in the grocery store looking at some strawberries, and I noticed there's an older white gentleman who's just a few feet away watching me. Now, before you think I'm paranoid, I kind of am, but before you really think I'm paranoid, I know he was watching me. How do I know it? Because he was doing this. And little by little, he was getting closer to me. And I'm like looking at, but I can see, I have good peripheral vision, and I'm saying, this guy's getting closer to me. And I'm thinking, all right, I'm trained in martial arts. I know I can take him. If he gets weird, I'm going to take him out. And then when he got close enough to me, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to stay here. I said, you got lucky that time. He said, you're not from around here, are you? Now, I used to be a trial lawyer, so I used to be quick on my feet before some of those cells started. And I jumped right back and said, yeah, I am. As a matter of fact, what about you? Yeah. He was taken aback that I might ask him, this older white man in Mount Vernon, Ohio, if he was local. Well, yeah, except for the time I went off to the service, I've lived here my whole, born and raised. And I said, me too. What does this lead to? I call it a sort of self-consciousness, a conspicuousness for folks who look like me in rural America. There's never a day off. Sometimes I know y'all work really hard, and there are days you say, I just need to take a day off, right? I'm going to take that and call in. You probably call in sick. I'm sick. I'm sick. When you're black and you live in rural America, you can't take that day off. It doesn't work. You can't check out. Say, you know what? Time out. I'm going to be white today. Y'all just look at somebody else for a little bit. This is all about a sense of belonging. Sense of belonging. I'm not talking about physically being in a space, being enumerated as a part of the census. I'm talking about how do you feel? Do you feel as though you belong? And this is done in the context, what I call isolation. Sometimes it's physical isolation, and sometimes it's psychological and emotional isolation. It's a withdrawal. Defense mechanism, we must have a psychologist or two in here, and they'll probably say, if you just go over to the couch there, Sheffield, we'll have a little conversation. But I grew up having those feelings of isolation, and they were exacerbated by the segregation that was all around me. Most of you probably went to high school. Just kidding. And your yearbooks, how they list all the seniors and stuff, and they do it what, alphabetically? The A's and then the B's, and wait a minute. Davis, White, Byrd, Williams, Mayo. In my town, they put all the black kids on the same page. And then when we talk about segregation, there's no segregation. You didn't build us a school, but you sure enough put us on our own page. What effect does that have upon small town black folks? And then when I talk about other instances, I used to give a talk about the impact of Brown versus Board of Education, the U.S. Supreme Court desegregation decision, 1954. And by the way, I was alive in 1954. Some of y'all, I know your history books, 54. Let's see, what was it? 1954, when I went back and looked at the newspapers in 1954, I got a sense of what was happening here in small town Ohio. Places like Portsmouth, right? Portsmouth and Hillsborough and Zanesville and Chillicothe and on and on and on. You know what, folks? When I talk to folks in rural America about swimming, oh no, we've never had separate pools. Really? And the story about Zanesville is a fascinating one. It was a black man who gave the money for the swimming pool. Now, I'm not a physicist. I'm not an engineer. But you tell me, you put black kids in a pool on one side and white kids on the other side, what that water going to do? I'm just asking you, because it's past me. So, anybody here like to roller skate? Anybody ever roller skated? Okay, just, All right, I have to tell you this, in doing our interviews, and by the way, we can talk about methodology and stuff. We do a lot of oral history, right? So I'm interviewing people all the time. We used to talk about colored night. Color night in Mount Vernon, Ohio was Tuesday nights. And then, that's because, well, it's obvious. Black kids only like to skate one night a week, right? I mean, that's the only way to explain why it is in a small town America we could only skate one night a week. But we like to skate more than once. So you know what we did? We went to Zanesville, Delaware, and Marion, and Mansfield. We sent our students out into the community. And I was excited when Dr. Jellison told me that this was actually a sort of community-based conference. It wasn't just academics, it was open to the community because we sent our students out into the community. 2 by 2, it started like a biblical thing. 2 by 2, they went out into the community. They're going to interview people. That's what we did. Because we said, and it's interesting hearing these conversations about exploiting people. We said, we need to form partnership with the local community and not just go in and say, we want to tell your story. We said, what could we do for you? What would you like to see us do if you had that opportunity, if you had that resource? And I say to my institution, I say, Kenyon, y'all cost $70,000 a year. You sure better come up with some money to send our kids out to the community to help do some oral history. And almost to a person, they said, help us to reclaim our past. The older generation was, in fact, saying, we need to do this now because as we pass on, the opportunities are not going to be there. And when you talk about the sources of the information, yeah, you can go read the county histories. And you can go look at all the documents in every archive you can find, and you're not going to find anything about my community. Knox County had 4 county histories, barely a mention of black people living in my community. And we read the newspapers, and believe me, you talk about microfilm and your eyes want to fall out of your head, you're reading the microfilm, and barely a mention of black folks in Knox County, Ohio, except for when they caused trouble or when they were talking about what's happening down south. But we knew if we went out into those communities, you know where those real archives were? They were in the basements and the attics and in the hearts and the minds of people who felt compelled to share. They looked at my students, the majority of whom are white students, going out into the local black community saying, we want to help tell your story. They felt so strongly that little by little they started to open up that trunk. And man, some of those trunks, just amazing. And so this is what we did. We made a promise. And I said to my students, don't you dare go ask a single person to work with you unless you're willing to give them something back. Don't you dare. And so we built a museum exhibit. Came here, not here, to Columbus, to the Ohio Connection, went down into their manufacturing. They taught us how to build these things. My students had to construct these 6-foot-tall pylons. We're putting, obviously, some descriptions and photographs and narrative and quotations from the various people, but we said, this belongs to the community. It's now, by the way, housed in the Knox County Historical Society Museum permanently. And so you could go there and see it. And that's what they wanted because they knew that at some point, I'm not going to be here any longer. And people won't know that we were here. I should check my time a bit. I'm getting to stop. Hey, you know what? I'm not going to stop. So if you want to go ahead and have lunch, go have lunch. I'm still going to be in here talking to 3 or 4 of you. So I'm just letting you know. All right. They said, we got some funding from the Ohio Humanities Council. You can sort of tell by the look at this. We published a book, Black Experience in Knox County, Ohio. Some of y'all might be old enough to know what a mimeograph is. Y'all spoiled today, because you have this technology, you can scan things in and it looks all so realistic. And no, we had to Xerox a lot of our stuff. And so sadly, our book was filled with a lot of Xeroxes. but it was also filled with a lot of heart. And we made them available at no cost to the entire community. We printed, the first print was 500, we printed another 500, and then another 500. Yeah, because that's how important it was. Black folks and white folks in Knox County, Ohio. We also put together a website. I'm the founding director of the Knox County Black History Archives. Sadly, I probably have more than 1,000 images that have not yet been entered because somebody's been too busy. But I'm retired now, so hey, I was like, every day I'm going to do 1,000. We also at our school did a project about LIRA, Latinos in Rural America, because it was part of our commitment to examine this binary of black and white. Hey, folks, I mean, I get it, this, black life in the Ohio, I get it. It's never been just the black life. And increasingly, in fact, more of my research is looking at multiracial America, especially in rural communities. Because if other communities are like mine, the majority of young people in those communities are multiracial. If you look at the data, the demographics of school children in Knox County, Ohio, there are more who identify as multiracial than there are of any other single racial group except for white. Keep that in mind because that's going to lead the next generation of scholarship. Of course, I'm retired, so what do I know? Why does it matter? And it's funny, I keep thinking about, I'm getting invited by the Farm Bureau to come and talk. But what they realize is that demographers are all saying, you know what, folks, it's not going to look the same. Things are going to be changing where you live. You need to think about it. And I'm not trying to proselytize. I'm not trying to tell you why diversity is good. I'm asking you to think about what does it mean in your community? And are you prepared to sort of lead? Most of you get it. Here in Ohio, and my apologies to those who are not in Ohio, but I don't care where you're from. Most of Ohio is rural. And I get it. Some of y'all are from those big cities, up in Cleveland and Akron and Dayton and Toledo and Cincinnati and Columbus. I don't think there are any other metropolitan areas left. The vast majority of the state is rural. And even this other image over on the right side talks about the sort of commuting phenomenon, which is really interesting to me because what I'm seeing in my own community is now Knox County is close enough to Columbus that I might want to live out there and drive into Columbus or drive into Mansfield. And what does that say about the population? What does it say about the impact of having more people of color? Now, again, when you're from small town America, wait a minute, were you born there? No, then you're not really from there. I mean, I'm sorry, you're not really from there. But it's okay, we'll accept you. But what happens now when we start seeing lots of folks who don't look like those folks coming into our communities? And so that's why it's important. Because white people generally are fearful of having non-white people come into their communities. There's a sense that, you know what, this has been such a great little town. I love it just the way it is. Don't mess it up. Don't mess it up. I'm not talking about you, I'm just talking about those other people. This disengaging me from those other people is interesting. And I heard reference this morning talking about exceptionalism. I happen to be part of that population of the exceptional colored people. People always say, we never had a problem, a race problem, an issue in our community. Our black people, our black people aren't like that. They don't get all uppity and crazy. And this notion of exceptionalism is extremely problematic for a lot of us. Now, I'm not an economist, although I have kind of conferred with some of my colleagues at Kenyon College who are economists, and when we talked about the impact of diversity, increased diversity in rural America, and I said, what data for you who like data, what evidence do we have that increased diversity impacts the local schools? I suppose we're going to, in my elementary school, from 5 to 8, watch out. I suppose, seriously, how many white people have lost jobs in Knox County, Ohio, because of increased diversity? Have you seen the job market right now? How badly they need workers? You mean to tell me because we might have some more Latina that we've now lost all these opportunities for white people? There's no data that suggests that in my rural community, and so far my colleagues haven't told me about any others. Housing. How many white people are being displaced by this influx of people of color in rural communities? These are the issues that I want people to start thinking about here, but they're all against the backdrop of racism and discrimination. And I feel badly sometimes because when I attempt to have this conversation with my colleagues, and by the way, I've spoken on this topic for more than 2 decades. And the last time I did it in Knox County, Ohio, I had a man call me at home. This is back when I had a landline. My kids said, "Get rid of that landline, Dad." But I had a landline, and I was listed in the phone book. And the man called me and he said, "That's not true." Okay. What exactly wasn't true? I wasn't sure. I mean, that was his leading comment. This Sheffield? Yeah. That's not true. Okay. My wife used to work at the community pool. She took tickets there. Colored children used to swim there sometimes. I see. All right. And your wife, I take it, was in the locker room every time a colored kid was in the locker room? Well, no. Did your wife? And as we went down, all he knew was it wasn't true, and he didn't like the fact that I was suggesting there may have been racism and discrimination in this idyllic little rural community. That's what he was really saying to me. Uh-oh. You know what? Black Lives Matter didn't bypass rural America. I know some of you think it did, but it didn't, interestingly enough. Whereas in my town, the marches and the rallies were probably 95% white, as was the case in a lot of other rural communities. I think that's fascinating. This is a topic that's extremely difficult for rural white people. All lives matter. You know that, right? They're absolutely right. All lives do matter. But there's a reason that we have to say Black Lives Matter. And that's where they have a lot of difficulty. This is around the corner from my house. I live in Gambier, a village, 2,500 people. It's probably the only Democratic stronghold in all of Knox County. We probably, 85%. And so it's not unusual to see this sign. You all know this sign, don't you? Yeah. And when I'm walking my dog, I'm like, hey, yeah. Feeling good about it. And then I stop and say, well, I don't know, are we conflating too much here? Because the more you can, it's like the all lives matter stuff. It's true. It's absolutely true. But there's a reason that we had to say Black Lives Matters. And I don't want to necessarily disperse it yet. Oh, no. I can't get, I like 58 more slides. We don't. Okay, let's see, how can I do this? All right. Oh, y'all know what this is, huh? Little announcement. Do you know what's going on today? Bigfoot Conference. Yep, Pleasant Hill Lake Park. today. You really? Yeah. Yeah, I think Ohio has the 4th largest number of sightings of Sasquatch. Yeah, it does. There you go. Well, I raise this within, only because I guess since I'm running out of time, I'll tell you really quickly the story of talking to the American Farm Bureau Federation. I said, how many of you, remember these are farm folks, how many of you know someone, I said, don't tell on yourself, how many of you know someone who has seen or claims to have seen Bigfoot? There were a few dozen hands that went up. This is rural America, folks. I don't know if you go to Chicago, say, anybody seen Bigfoot? But in rural America, and I said, okay, don't tell on yourselves, how many of you know someone who believes, even if you have not seen Bigfoot, that Bigfoot exists? And again, now people are like looking around first because you don't want to look stupid to everybody else. And damn it, yes, I believe Bigfoot exists. And so hands went up. I said, that's really nice, because when your neighbors who look like me say to you that discrimination has occurred in your community, what do you tend to do? You deny it. Can't possibly. I've never seen that. I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen discrimination like that. You're willing to accept that Bigfoot exists, that somebody has seen Bigfoot, that people believe in Bigfoot. But if your neighbors say, you know what happened to me? Oh, that didn't happen to you. Oh, you're overly sensitive. You're exaggerating. And I say to them, you need to be open to the possibility that it did in fact occur. Even if it wasn't your own experience, even if it runs counter to what you believe, don't do that disservice to your neighbors. They'll say, that's a lie. Man calls me up, that's a lie. That ain't true. Well, I'm not going to get to the rest of my 58 slides, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you all so much for the invitation. My publicist said I had to put my book over there on the side, so here's the book. And if you have your cell phone, you can go right to my website. If you hit the whatever, you've been a very warm and welcoming group. Thank you so much.
Couple of questions for Professor Sheffield. 5 minutes worth? Do we have a microphone that works?
Yeah, this I'm fine. Oh, okay.
Talk loudly.
See, you had all these stimulating presentations, and you all had questions, and everybody was feeling good. I talking, I'll say, I don't know about this. That's what I've been doing most of my career. Community partnership. It is the only way that you can achieve something like this, is to go out. In fact, we sort of set our students up by saying, okay, first week of class, find out everything you can about local black people. And so they're looking in the newspapers, they're trying to look at the county histories, they're trying to find, and they came back and they sort of this is going to be a long semester because we're not finding anything. And I said, why not? What is it about the lives of black people in rural America that is not public? Public by design, public on purpose, public. And so that's where we began. And we realized if you want to really know something about black folks in small town America, you need to go where black folks in small town America are. And you form a relationship so they trust you enough to share with you their lives. And so we did go to the black churches. And sadly, as many of you know, black churches are on the decline in many rural communities. They don't have sufficient congregations to keep them going. And our two oldest black churches in Knox County are now defunct. And we just got historic markers, approved and erected to at least say, in 1873, the Wayman Chapel AME Church was the first black church. But you really do have to build those sort of relationships. And in fact, that's one of the jobs I've done for the Humanities Council. I've been a consultant going around to communities saying, we want to do something like you did. How do we go about doing it? And so I've begun to sort of design workshops of, okay, but I only do it if it's a partnership. If it's just academics, I'm not really interested. I'm sorry, that sounds really bad, but I'm not. Because it really is not for you. It's really cool for, publication and all that sort of stuff. But if it's just about your publication, I just don't have the time or the interest. So start there. Partnerships, community engagement. I'm working on a workshop now, again, the plug on, go to my website. It's called Rural Diversity Leadership Summits. This is what, the people who do all that branding sort of stuff that, what are you talking? And it basically says, you go to rural communities and you say, let's bring the leaders together, the clergy, the Chamber of Commerce, the hospital system, local government, educators. And I'm not talking about having dozens of people. I'm talking about 10, 12 people around the table. Because if you're not having a conversation, then you're talking at people. And I can tell you, they don't want to be talked at. They don't want to be talked at. Why would they? Sit around the table and start having conversations. How do we tell the stories about the invisible? And we call ours the community within. That we have this larger community in Knox County, but we also have a community within that is relatively invisible. I know you're hungry. I know everyone's like, well, I've got to get my lunch.
One more question, Dr. Jellison?
The town is scrambling because they have realized that C.T. Vivian is from Macomb, who was a civil rights activist. And so we've just, had a mural painted, and we're doing all these things to honor C.T. Vivian. And the way you spoke today really made me reflect on C.T. Vivian. And he's written about how he was isolated growing up in Macomb. And a lot of us from our high school are we walked the same hallways because C.T. Vivian went to our high school and we didn't know it. And there's just been the libraries just being named after him and we didn't know. There's a lot of anger and a lot of reflection, and I think it's useful that we can acknowledge the pain about somebody who's famous, and maybe we can start to extend that to the community and the members who live their everyday lives there as well. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Let me quickly say this in response. It's not always about anger. I mean, a lot of us small town colored folks are not necessarily angry. Many of us are in fact sad. We're sad because we're invisible. And when people say to me, I don't see color. I don't see color. I know it's well intended. I think they really sincerely believe that. But you're also saying you don't see me as a person of color. You've just basically said you don't really exist. It's funny, I saw the slide about Frederick Douglass Frederick Douglass came to Mount Vernon, Ohio in 1977 to give a lecture. Never during my schooling did I ever hear a word about Frederick Douglass coming to my community. Marion Anderson coming to my, never heard a word about Marion. So I'm sort of saying to you, you in effect say, your past is not important. It doesn't really mean anything to our current community. And so that's, to me, the most compelling reason for all of y'all in small town America to say, we need to do something. Because we should never let young people grow up believing they're not important. It's not worth the time and the energy to tell them that they do, in fact, contribute to this community. But I'm sorry, I'm preaching. My grandfather was a Baptist minister. My grandmother was an evangelist. Sorry, I'll stop preaching.
All right. Thanks again to Professor Ric Sheffield. I do believe it's lunchtime.